All right, hello, and welcome to Howard 122 Live with Kat
and Kaitlan,
and we will be your guest host. No, we will be your host tonight and every night. Okay, so basically, we decided to do our Moodle post this time via a video. We're gonna test run it, see if it works, and that's that. We first wanted to start our post with a formal apology to Claire because we realized that we misunderstood your last post about the hippies.
About corporations in general. I don't think we'd read that chapter yet. We were wondering where you were coming from, and now we know.
Now we get it.
And your post is so helpful as a framing mechanism for this whole train of thought that we went on. Yes. So thank you.
So thanks. And the hierarchy thing is a really interesting point, and was something I'm also really interested in now. It's like, how do hierarchies fit into the secondary group and corporations?
Yeah. Should the corporation be non-hierarchical, hierarchical? Just a question you were asking.
Yeah, and was it really accounted for in the reading from Durkheim?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
Cool. Thanks. So
to start our discussion, we're going to look at what is a corporation to Durkheim. What is the secondary group he's talking about? So we've drawn a diagram. Scribble over here. So Durkheim conceives of a secondary group as acting as an intermediary between the state and the individual, controls the communication between the two, and hopefully ensures that the communication is reciprocal. In a state where there's a dearth, not a state, in a condition where there's a dearth of secondary groups, what happens? It says if there's a really strong state, then it can act tyrannically, and if there's a really weak state, and there aren't many secondary groups around, then the state will be flying around in the face of public sentiment, and there'll be a lot of instability, kind of like in the economic state we're in now, Durkheim might argue.
So, what is it that a secondary group needs? So we were talking about Whole Foods. Does Whole Foods fit? And we realized Whole Foods does not fit because it does not fill the social role, because there's not a close connected relationship between individuals. There's not a strong affiliation and close bond. Now you could argue maybe there is with commodities and stuff like that, with commodity fetishism, but the reason that doesn't work is because there's not a reciprocal relationship between Whole Foods CEO and the employees and then the customers.
And this is similar to the description of the trade unions and why the trade unions for Durkheim don't work as corporations, because there's this inequality in between the employer and the employee.
Mm-hmm. There you go. So there's that. And then, again, so there needs to be equal power in that. And then we were also talking about electoral college now. Does electoral college fit this? Again, it doesn't fit it for similar reasons, but more exclusively because there's not much of a social role. It's not close and connected to individuals. It's not a social space. You're not like, oh, I'm going to go hang out with the electoral college. I'm not going to express my opinions. And that doesn't happen. Another problem with that is it's not consistent. It's not year-round. It's not a space for people to be able to go to. So that doesn't really fit that role as a representing body in the way that Durkheim believed it should be. And then there's got to be negotiating power is another important key aspect to a secondary group.
And the term Durkheim used is like the ability for the institution to act as a counterbalance to the state.
Bingo. And then finally, it needs to protect individuals' rights. It also needs to protect the state from individuals, as Kaitlan was talking about earlier, in that if the secondary group is not protecting the individuals from the state, then there can be sort of not a dictatorship, but it can be oppressive.
Yeah, a dictatorship.
Tyrannical despotism. And then if it's not protecting the state from the individuals, it can be sort of what he called stormy. That can be very constant flux of opinions from the individuals, would not let the state be sort of consistent and
directive.
The
key point of Durkheim, the state has to be directive for there to be progress. Otherwise, you could enter a state of stagnation.
Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't be directive because it wouldn't be stable.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's that. And then sort of a question to think about in your own mind is, must the primary interest of a secondary group be social? Whereas something like Whole Foods, the primary interest of Whole Foods, although it maybe is like a hippie, good corporation, as we see them now, the primary interest of it is profit. So the primary interest of it is economic. So it's not social. So must the secondary groups need primary interest be social?
And inherently, I guess, in a corporation where the aim is profit, fact is Whole Foods is still capitalistic. And I think that poses a problem for Durkheim, as we've discussed before. Maybe both in our Moodle post last time. Maybe.
Yeah,
in my Moodle post, discussed the problem of hierarchy. That it's not what Durkheim is looking for.
Right.
In a large class context.
Yeah, and he doesn't necessarily address that or not, so that's something to think about. So we have a pick for our favorite secondary group. Are you ready for it?
The ACLU.
Woo! Congratulations, ACLU. Do you want to go over to the ACLU board? Okay, I'll let you do this. So over here we have ACLU.
ACLU is our secondary group pick.
Congratulations.
Maybe. Is this what a functional secondary group / corporation looks like? We're trying to figure it out.
So the ACLU fits all the needs that we talked about over there on that board. However, the problem with ACLU, we would say, is, so we could say that, all right, we've got this pretty good secondary group, but something still isn't working right?
Right. The main issue, we would argue, is that there aren't enough ACLU centers. Ultimately, it's just as if the same state as if there weren't enough secondary groups. There just aren't enough to cover everyone.
So there's not enough for sort of that social role for every person to be able to be a part of a secondary group and to be able to voice their opinion and be a member to it, because there aren't enough of them.
Yeah, exactly. And when there aren't enough of a certain group, what happens? You end up with not enough negotiating power, can't act as a counterbalance against the oppressions of the state. The ACLU tries, gets to a lot of cases, tries but can't represent everyone. There aren't enough members. Yeah.
And so the state that we're in right now with this lack of enough ACLUs is, so there's that. And also we would say, have a weak state, but also a lack of secondary groups. So the state is not directive, and also there's an inconsistent instability.
Right. I'd say so.
Yeah.
So we were also wondering, we kind of started brainstorming, well, what are other potential secondary groups? We've got a little list over here that we'd like the class to ponder and help us figure out.
So our hanging question for you all is Occupy a secondary group that would fit Durkheim's description? And is the Tea Party a secondary group that might fit Durkheim's description? And what about political parties in general? Democratic Party, Republican Party, parties in other countries, do you know about them? That's our hanging question for you. So answer that one.
Yeah.
And that was Howard 122 Live with Kat
and Kaitlan.
And we'll see you next time.